Hamatakiapi. Hi everyone, my name is Erin Goodpipe, and today I'm going to be presenting on a topic that's really near and dear to my heart, and that is centering our identity in the work that we do. I really want to start by just expressing my gratitude for everyone who's tuning in and for the opportunity to share a little bit about my perspective and my experiences, which ultimately come from the field and most importantly from my community. It's important for me to note what the term anomalous means to me, and for the sake of this presentation, I'm going to be referring to the anomalous as human to spirit or spirit realm interactions, or human to non-human beings, which of course is very broad and can mean many different things. So I want to begin by sharing a little bit about myself, and the reason why I do this is to exemplify a very important Indigenous practice, which is rooted in the ethic of relationship building by knowing one another. It's also for accountability, so that when someone speaks certain knowledges, we can trace back where that knowledge comes from, and it gives us the right to represent that knowledge. So again, my name is Erin Goodpipe. I'm a Dakota, Anishinaabe, and Nehe woman from Standing Buffalo Dakota Nation, which is the name of my reserve, and it's located in southern Saskatchewan here in Canada, which is where I am presenting now. I am a mother and a wife, and I have many younger siblings who I've helped raise, and so kinship is really important to me. I consider myself a multidisciplinary artist, educator, and researcher with a background in Indigenous education and Indigenous studies. So as you can see, Indigenous identity is just really important both to my personal and professional life. My journey into the anomalous actually begins in a very personal way. It starts with myself as a child, as a young person, and as an adult, an ongoing journey where I'm connecting back into my community. And as a young person, I was going back and learning ceremony, becoming really close with elders and our land-based practices. And that's where I really began to realize that our realities as Indigenous people might actually be seen as the so-called anomalous. We actually have realities that are steeped in very sophisticated knowledges, stories, and understandings about the world and about ourselves that include human to non-human relations, or human to spirit relations. It's very important to note the context of where Indigenous people are at, and of course I can't speak for all Indigenous people, but in my work I have an understanding that, for the past 500 years or so, Indigenous people have been battling the oppressive forces from colonialism, and have been facing literal and cultural genocide for many, many years. It's also issues that are not far off in the generations. For example, my parents, my grandparents are people who went to residential school systems, or were in 60 scoop systems where essentially they were taken out from their families and put into white families. So there is a lot that we are dealing with as Indigenous people in revaluing and reclaiming our cultural practices and understandings. It's absolutely important for me to note that while we were fighting colonial forces, our ways and understandings, they didn't die, they just went underground. And so we're in a time of revitalizing our Indigenous identities in a really living way. Throughout this personal and ongoing journey, I began to learn lots about my Indigenous identity and Indigenous worldview. But before I talk about this, I really want to preface the fact that, I'm not an expert on every single Indigenous nation or tribe and their specific cultural expressions. I want to make the note that across Canada, United States, and throughout the entire globe, that there are many distinctive tribes, so we each have different cultures, and not to generalize or homogenize us into one group. With that being said, I learned that Indigeneity held very sophisticated understandings of our human condition and the realities that we live in. These understandings are exemplified in our stories, in our practices, and in our knowledges, which have been passed down through the generations over thousands of years. Inherent to Indigeneity is the understanding of self, which is that we are comprised of four main aspects, and that is the mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual parts. And speaking specifically to the spiritual part is that it's our job in this life actually to really understand who we are as spirit beings on a path that's going somewhere, that there's a spiritual realm that we exist in that we can't necessarily always see with the human eye, and that there are other spiritual beings things that are around us. Of course, with all of creation, that might mean the plants, the animals, the insects, the elements even, and how we connect to all of those things, because they all have inherent spiritual value. And so encoded in our worldviews and our practices are these ethics of living respectfully, in reciprocity and in harmony with all of creation. With this understanding of the many dimensions of the person also comes the knowledge that we are given very specific spiritual gifts and abilities to be able to connect to our inner selves, as well as connect with the spirit realm around us. I want to make a specific point here, that with Indigeneity, that we have an understanding that there are spirits in the world, but we also have an understanding of other non-human beings, which include little people, big people, and those who are outside of our earth realm. Now, I'm using these very specific broad terms because I don't want to share the names, even because we have protocols around how we share those things. And when you want to learn about these things from my community, we actually have to do that in a very experiential way. You have to go out and seek that in a respectful way. And so I'm hesitant to share those very specific names or protocols. But we have ceremonies, we have protocols and procedures that actually develop those very specific spiritual gifts so that we can connect in very deeply with the anomalous realm. So you might be asking yourself, what does identity have to do with our investigatory work in the anomalous or the so-called supernatural? And for me, both personally and professionally, because for me I don't see a segregation between the two, is that identity is really about asking the fundamental questions about our realities and what we identify with or believe in within those realities about ourselves and about the world. Now, coming from that Indigenous perspective again, we develop our identities throughout our lives. You might characterize this by 4 main questions. Who am I? Where am I from? Why am I here? And where am I going? Those of us who work in the anomalous have a very important job, because we are working on the outside or the fringe of belief, around evidence, around who we are as human beings, around what our world is and isn't. So we have an important job where we get to ask those existential questions and go on the exploration. So being able to go on these journeys, have conversations with other people, provide evidence or provide perspective, actually is doing an amazing service for all of humankind. I'll circle back to these questions at a later time, but I want to get into more of my formal work with Indigenous identity into the so-called supernatural or the anomalous realm. So again, Indigenous identity has that component of spirituality, and in academia, in research, and in education, that was a very normal practice, which was to include the spiritual dimension. I was really privileged to be able to work with Indigenous leaders and teams where Indigenous worldviews, practices, Indigenous ways of knowing and being were really normal. They weren't seen as something anomalous. They weren't outside of the norm. But then I began to work doing investigatory paranormal work that was delving into the paranormal industry, the Western one. And this is where I began to have a lot of realizations around the industry and how it omitted culture, Indigenous people, and even people of color. I had to ask myself, what's going on with this industry where we are leaving out very key voices, very key histories, ultimately leaving out Indigenous voices, people of color, and even women. A huge problem with having underrepresented groups and therefore perspectives and worldviews is also that our methodologies and our investigations aren't in various forms. And so we're going to get the same recipe delivering perhaps the same results. And, we're really doing a disservice then to our investigatory work. In this, I realized that the industry is also suffering from capitalism and colonialism, much like other sectors of society, like education, health, law, and justice, and of course the list goes on. It seems clear to me that the industry is steeped in a lot of ego and entertainment, that it becomes about the shallow portrayal of so-called evil, about perpetuating perhaps harmful stereotypes. It becomes fear-mongering, fear-provoking. The result of all of this is that it creates a situation for the anomalous realm where when we bring this up as a topic, that people ultimately other the topic. They see it as fringe or perhaps weird or strange to talk about humans and their interactions with non-human beings or with the spirit realm. And so it becomes a missed opportunity for us to have these very deep conversations that actually pertain to each and every one of us. And that is something that is actually getting away from the credibility of this industry, where we have the opportunity to go on an existential exploration that answers those questions about our humanity. With all of this said, I want to offer some methods and approaches in investigatory work around the anomalous, which of course is going to be rooted in some principles around identity, and of course for me it is rooted in my indigeneity. Of course, approaching what I'm about to say with the caveat that you're going to adjust that to your own comfort levels or your own abilities. So I always begin by grounding myself in my intention for doing the work, and that of course is evaluating the reason why I'm doing the work. Now it's so important that we do this. Of course it's tied to a moral obligation of doing the work not just for myself but for the betterment of other people, so that we can ask questions and explore potential answers and be able to provide that to the public. Coupled with your intention is also evaluating or reflecting on what it is that you believe about your own human condition, your own realities, and of course what is happening in this situation with the anomalous. The potential benefit of grounding yourself in your intention and your beliefs is that you'll feel anchored in times of uncertainty. Oftentimes, when we are investigating certain phenomena, it can be tied to a certain place or a space, and so it's so useful that we research what the history is of that place or space, or even the area, the land, the territory. And what happens usually is that we're looking mainly at a colonial time frame, whereas there are people groups, specifically Indigenous people, who have existed in those territories for thousands of years. So they might already have knowledges that pertain to the phenomena that's occurring there. So I would encourage people to really ask the original peoples what they think about what is happening there. Another point I want to offer is to go into investigations with consideration, whether that is with care or with caution. Now, for Indigenous people, we actually have very complex, very tried and true ways of engaging with the spiritual realm or with the anomalous. So we have ceremonial approaches, and of course that means that, you know, specific people can do certain things. We earn the rights, we hone our gifts, and of course all of this is with the knowledge that these things should be taken very seriously, because there can be consequences with what it is that we're dealing with. On the note of consideration is really remembering to treat the anomalous and specifically the spirit world with a sense of reverence and respect. I've experienced where you go into situations and oftentimes there's this sense of ego that we can go in and mess with or disrupt spirits. And the truth is like, if we believe that these are human spirits, then that means they had a story, they have a story, they had a life, they had a family, perhaps they have feelings still. And so when we're having interactions with spirits, our ethics shouldn't go out the door. So it's just really important that we remember that crucial piece around respect and reverence. Lastly, I want to encourage something that might seem really obvious, but to include different voices, different perspectives in your research or investigatory work into the supernatural or the anomalous. Of course, speaking to women, people of color, Indigenous people, and especially looking to, if you're doing investigatory work in a specific place, there are Indigenous people who will have knowledges, will have history, will even have their own procedures and how they address the spirit world. And so I would just really encourage people to reach out and include them in your processes. If you've made it this far, I want to say thank you, Pidamea Wopira, to each and every one of you for taking the time to listen to some of my experiences and my thoughts. I'm just very grateful for the opportunity to be able to connect with some of you. And just looking forward to hearing some of the other presentations, because we just get stronger and more knowledgeable when we share ideas. So again, just looking to our identities, asking those questions: who am I? Where am I from? Why am I here? And where am I going? Are the existential questions that are rooted in all of the work that we do in the anomalous. And hopefully when we do that kind of work with pure intent, we can normalize the supernatural and make it a natural phenomena for us to ask these questions, to go on these journeys, and then to share our findings with each other. So again, thank you so much, and I look forward to hearing from you.